Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to HANA Microelectronics Q3 review. I will start now. So, we've had a difficult quarter, as I think everybody knows now. Operating profits came in at about 21 million. That's down very substantially from our Q3 last year. Of 698 and last quarter of 494 million baht. So the key factors impacting our Q3 results were as follows. In the third quarter, we thought that the IC loading would improve. Actually, it did improve, but towards the end of the quarter, it was clear most of our customers felt that the demand was not coming back to the level that they had hoped, so they started to cut back quite aggressively towards the end of the third quarter. Probably the big impact was the revaluation of inventory, which reduced our operating income by approximately 223 million baht. We revised it from 36 to 32 because of the change in the US dollar Thai baht exchange rate. And of course, this increased stronger baht has an impact and lowered our margins. We also see very continuing weakness in our silicon carbide demand, and a drop in prices of EV cars has slowed down growth. And also the issue of tariffs for EV also impacting demand, and I will talk a little bit about that later on. Our EMS business did actually relatively well compared to the other businesses, but I would say was flat from the previous year. We did have some positive news that we added back about 300 million baht, which we got back from the Credit Suisse Supply Chain Fund, which we wrote off about 3 years ago. So by the numbers, you can see year on year, the sales were down in baht terms 7%, operating profits down 97%, and the margin was virtually zero. So, but we still generate positive EBITDA of 456 million, but down substantially from 1.1 billion. Okay? And net profit after tax around 400 million. Net cash and short-term investments were up substantially from a year ago because of the rights issue that we did last October. So that increased from 3.5 billion to 9 billion. And on the quarter on quarter, we saw sales revenue down 10%, and the rest of the numbers were the same. So let's move on to the each of the main groups in HANA. So starting with our EMS business in Lamphun, we saw revenues down 10% on the year, on the quarter, and 5% down on the year. Automotive actually was quite stable, considering we believe that this is one of the weak areas at the moment. You read a lot about in the news about a lot of automotive companies struggling in Europe, in America, even in Thailand. The sales are down a lot, but held up for us reasonably well. Industrial and RF was also okay, but commercial and medical were flat. We always focus very strongly on productivity and automation, and year on year we reduced our direct labor by 7.7% because we anticipate a minimum wage increase. Now, this may be not as high as we feared, but we continue to improve on our productivity and automation. Of course, the stronger Thai baht impacted our margins as well, so that didn't help. And looking forward in Q4, we expect our revenues to be about the same, slightly lower than Q3, but the dollar has strengthened a little bit after the election, so that might help this operation. Moving on to HANA Micro in China. Now, China really is suffering. As you know, China and America are starting a trade war. The the war's already started actually, but it continues to get worse. Our revenues were down 25% on the quarter and 7% on the year. But we did finally get certified for our inlay business, which is the Auburn certification. And as you can see, our inlay tags grew 290% on the year. So that's one bright spot that we invested in last year, and that's finally starting to show, you know, some significant gains. Access control and computer hardware did grow, but consumer was weak, and the outlook is flat versus Q3. But because of the inlay tags now being certified, we hope that will support the weakness we see in other areas. PC shipments were down about 1.3% in the third quarter, and that's year on year. As you may know, PC and also mobile actually have done quite well because a lot of consumers are looking to replace this type of product because of the AI impact. So whilst this business has been weak over the past 2 or 3 years, we are expecting it to be a bit improving this year and next year because of the AI inclusion into PC and mobile. Now, HANA Yucha, this OSAT business, definitely was a big impact on us. Quarter on quarter, our sales were down 5%, but 60% on the year. So our actual loadings did improve from Q2, up 7% to 58%, because of our standard IC. But the other divisions dropped 20%. Custom product group, which mainly is industrial business. And the revaluation of the Thai baht impacted this operation most significantly. Out of the 232 million, probably about 160 million was due to the change in UTR. Okay. And as I said earlier, the fourth quarter outlook is a further drop. But what we have done is, unfortunately, we've had to reduce our cost. This is important when your business is under pressure. We had to lay off certain direct labor and also did early retirement for some of our monthly salary staff, because we see the outlook for this business to be weak at least until the middle of next year. So we have to reduce our cost base so that we don't continue to lose money going forward. Some good news, however, is that the new opportunities for next year are looking actually quite promising. As you may know, HANA has a range of sensor assembly solutions, and we have won 6 new customers, or actually more than 6. We have, I would say, more than 10 additional new customers that we're negotiating. We hope we can get most of them. And for our existing customers, we have new opportunities of over 10. So that's actually quite a high level of new opportunities, but they won't really start to have any impact until the middle of next year. Moving on to China. As I mentioned, China, of course, is going through difficult times, but we did see an increase quarter on quarter, up 6%, although down 25% on the year. Overall, the Chinese OSAT business remains pretty low, and competing with local Chinese is very difficult because, as you know, many Chinese companies have financial support from their government, so their cost is very, very low, and it's very difficult for us to compete. That said, we have won some new business. We've got 2 new local customers for a specific area, RFIC segment, and that's going to start ramping early next year. And what drove our increase, despite the overall difficulty, was a resumption of our EV modules, which actually had stopped for nearly a whole year because the inventory, there was too much inventory in the customer. This has started, and so this will help the top line going forward. Our power modules and discretes, I think will be where we will see some growth next year, but again, probably not till the middle of 2025. So the outlook, whilst we see some improvement, the overall standard IC remains very weak. So when we look at the overall semiconductor industry, it looks like things are improving, but really that is driven by the AI memory type of business, okay, and not by the standard consumer automotive industrial, which is the area that we're working in. So that area still remains very challenging, but the overall semiconductors is growing because of AI microprocessors and memory, but we don't participate in that sector, unfortunately. As I mentioned earlier, smartphones, which have been very difficult over the past 3 or 4 years, is showing some growth, and that again is driven by the AI, new phones with AI features coming through. So as I mentioned earlier, you actually see our loading in the OSAT business going up, okay, but because of the revaluation of the inventory, that unfortunately resulted in an overall loss in our Ayutthaya operation, even though the sales are up. But we project that in Q4, that bar will go lower again, hopefully won't go too much lower, and we expect that by middle of next year, we should start seeing some improvements. So Q4 and Q1, I think, will be difficult quarters. And of course, we have all this tariff issue. We're all waiting to see what Trump is going to do. So a lot of people are just holding back, waiting to see how the geopolitics will influence everyone's business. Moving on to the US, actually they've done quite well. Even though they were down 9% of the quarter, they were up 18% year on year. Inlay sales were up 86%. So this is the same business we do in China, but our microelectronics business was a bit flat. And as I mentioned, we finally got certified by this American certification body called Orban, both in America and in China. So that is going to support our growth of this business going forward. You may remember we bought and expanded a new factory, and finally we have closed down the old factory. So up until recently, we were running both factories, so that was a high cost, but that is finished now, and we are now fully in our new facility in Solon, and we closed down the Twinsburg operation. The fourth quarter, the outlook is a drop in the micro business because we're exiting the light cost sector, but we expect that to be offset in increase in inlays and tire tags. And this tire tag business is expected to grow our business substantially next year, hopefully more than 20% going forward. Okay, Cambodia, our revenues were up 11% on the quarter, but down nearly 40% on the year. So unfortunately, we have a high exposure to the remote control business there, and that business has dropped off, after the COVID pandemic is over. We have continued, however, to improve our productivity, reducing headcount 28% on the year and 19% on the quarter. So very aggressive cost control. The operation is still loss-making, but the loss is close to break even. It's still, not much loss. We think that the fourth quarter will still remain weak, but we have a number of new projects coming from China because of the tariff issue. So we are a lot more optimistic about the outlook for next year. And as you may know, Cambodia has a TA certification, and that will support that activity going forward. So I think we have a good chance for Cambodia to become profitable in 2025. Here is a chart of our end applications. And you can see telecom increased year on year, as did auto, industrial slightly, and the rest, R&D was flat, and the rest reduced. Okay, moving on to PMS in Korea. We continue to have a very difficult situation, unfortunately. Our revenues dropped 25% quarter on quarter, and although we're up 39% on the year, the situation in general is that the demand for silicon carbide has dropped very, very substantially due to the drop in the EV car demand, particularly in the West, in Europe and the US. China, the demand is still high, but we are not yet into the Chinese automotive supply chain. Okay, so we are struggling a lot, and we have taken the decision. As you may know, we have two businesses, right? The silicon and the silicon carbide. We've taken the decision to exit our silicon manufacturing by the middle of next year. And we have signed an agreement to move that operation to a foundry in China, a large foundry in China. They can produce the silicon products for PMS at a cost which is lower than we can produce. So there's no point for us to do it and make a loss. So we're going to move that out, and that will take us until about the middle of next year. Okay. We've also signed a joint venture with a Chinese partner to focus on silicon carbide in the EV industry, because they have a relationship that we don't have. And that was signed about 2 months ago, and we hope that this will show some positive growth starting in Q1 already in next year. Okay. We have also started development discussions with the major Korean automotive group. I mean, I think you know who they are. I can't name the name, but that won't have anything positive until probably 2026. But at least we're starting discussions to potentially develop specific products for the major Korean automotive companies. So I think that's a very positive sign. We're focusing also on the Indian market. We see India as one of the growth areas in the world. And we have signed two collaborations. One is with a local Indian OSAT company to assemble and sell our SiC product. And the other one is a distributor to sell our silicon product. So we keep them separately. Okay. And actually, in early January, I will be sending a team from Korea to do a roadshow with in many provinces in India to talk about how we can support the demand of silicon carbide with our Indian partners. So I think this is quite an interesting development, but again, probably will not see anything really positive until the second half of next year. So demand for silicon carbide remains very weak because of this issue. And as a result, the other competition is also focusing on China, because the demand for EVs in America and Europe are very low, I think you know. And that creates this big competition and drop in price in China. So this is a struggle we have. That said, we have a large pipeline of opportunities which we've been working on. There are many Chinese companies looking to qualify our product. And the recent tension between the US and China may favor us, because a lot of Chinese companies are being pushed by the Chinese government not to use American suppliers, including American silicon carbide suppliers. So we don't know exactly how that may help us, but we think that will be positive. We may have a better idea of that as we go into Q1 next year. Okay, some updates on FT1. Obviously, as I've said to you, PowerMaster is having difficulties because of the drop in pricing and demand for silicon carbide. And so we are evaluating what impact that will have on our project to build the silicon carbide foundry wafer fab with PTT in Thailand. So at the moment, both HANA and PTT are watching this situation. We are also want to get some clarity on how Paris will impact this industry. So we will have a better idea after Trump, takes power on January the 20th. And so we will wait to see the developments as a result of this situation, and we will then re-evaluate the timing and the size of this investment. So at this point in time, we are not pushing forward. We are waiting to see how the market situation will develop with all the geopolitics and the implications on the demand for silicon carbide going forward. I can't say any more than that because, as you know, FT1 is majority owned by PTT, so this is what we have agreed is our update for FT1. So just on the financial numbers, our EBITDA was 456, down from 1.1 billion. Our capex also dropped from 670 to 330, and we had an increase in net cash by 5.5 billion from 3.5 to 9 billion. So the outlook for Q4 and beyond, EMS looks stable, supported by autos, test and measurement, and commercial demand. RFID looks very positive for our inlay business, both in the US and in China. We believe that new TA opportunities in Cambodia, and because of the tariff issue, Chinese American companies wanting to relocate their business out of China will support growth both in Cambodia and in Lamphun. Okay. The OSAT business, I think, will be weak until at least the end of Q1 or sometime in Q2, maybe the middle of next year. But the levels of inventory are very, very low. So I do expect to see some improvement coming in around mid Q2 or the end of Q2. But again, we have to see what is the impact of the US tariff and how that will affect the industry. PMS will remain challenging, but as I mentioned earlier, we're going to exit the manufacturing of silicon. That will reduce our losses by the middle of next year, so that's very important. And we are confident that even despite the difficult situation, we should start to see some wins because we have a lot of opportunities coming through. But of course, it still will be very difficult, at least for most of 2025. We are now hopefully planning on EBITDA breaking even in PMS by Q4 2025. Okay. As you may know, after Trump won the election, the dollar strengthened. That's because there's concern about US inflation going up because of tariffs. So from the lows of 32, 33, the baht is around 34, 34.50. So that will help. But I don't see it going back to 36, 37. But at least it's better than 32, 32.50. Okay. And clearly, because of the tariff threat from Trump, there's a lot more discussions about China plus one. And I do think Thailand and Cambodia will be a benefit. But we also need to see what Trump will tariff Thailand. It is very possible that Thailand could also be tariffed, because if you look at Southeast Asia, the biggest country in terms of the trading deficit with America is Vietnam with over 100 billion. Okay, and number two is Thailand with about 40 billion. It's a big drop from 100 to 40, but Thailand is number two, higher than Malaysia, Philippines, and other Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, etc. So we cannot assume that Thailand will get out scot-free. We have to wait to see next year when he resumes power. Okay, so that's all I have, and I will look at your questions and see if I can answer them. Thank you. I can't give you specific information about our performance in Q4, but generally speaking, it's not going to be strong. It's going to be weak for all the things that I've said to you. HANA, I think, will continue to struggle until the middle of next year. And that's mainly for two reasons. One, because it's going to take time for us to exit the silicon business out of PMS to reduce the losses, but we are taking action. And two, the OSAT business will take time to recover. And I think that's going to happen by the middle of next year. So Q4 and Q1, I think, are going to be difficult.
สำหรับไตรมาส 4แล้วก็ไตรมาส 1ของปีหน้านะคะเท่าที่มองเนี่ยก็น่าจะไม่ได้ว่าดีขึ้นจากเดิมอะค่ะเพราะว่าจริงๆแล้วเราประมาณไว้ว่าน่าจะประมาณ Q2 ของปีหน้าน่าจะดีขึ้นเนื่องจากมี2เหตุก็คืออย่างแรกคือเราต้องใช้เวลาในการออกจากธุรกิจของซิลิคอนที่เกาหลีนะคะและอย่างที่2ก็คือไอ้เจ้าตัว OSAT business ที่เป็น outsource อะค่ะมันจะต้องใช้เวลากว่ามันจะกลับคืนมาได้ค่ะน่าจะประมาณ Q2 ของปีหน้านะคะ The sales level of this year. How about the target? If it's lower than the target, what's the cost?
Again, I can't give specific numbers. I don't know for the whole year, but this year, of course, is going to be difficult for us.
ก็ไม่สามารถจะให้เลขถึงขนาดนั้นได้นะคะแต่ก็ต้องบอกได้ว่าปีนี้เป็นปีที่ค่อนข้างยากลำบากเลยทีเดียวค่ะ About the revenue and sales next year.
So next year, I think will still be a challenging year because the first half will be difficult, but I'm more optimistic for the second half. So I think we can see some growth, but also I want to inform you of one important factor. You may know that HANA's revenue is close to 750 million euros, and there's a new regulation coming in now where if any group revenue is more than 750 million euro, we have to pay a minimum of 15% tax. Now, today, HANA is only paying about 4 to 5% tax because we have good support from the Board of Investment, and we would like to keep that support. I don't want to pay another 10, 50% tax, okay? So what we are trying to do is discuss with some of our big customers whether they can change our trading relationship to a consignment model. It means that the top line will not grow much, but the bottom line will improve.
สำหรับตัวที่ของปีหน้านะคะเท่าที่วางไว้ก็คือสำหรับในครึ่งปีแรกเนี่ยก็ยังน่าจะคงเหมือนเดิมแต่สำหรับครึ่งปีที่2เนี่ยตามที่เรามองเนี่ยก็น่าจะดีขึ้นแล้วก็เราน่าจะมองเห็นการเติบโตขึ้นนะคะแต่ว่าอย่างหนึ่งที่จะต้องบอกไว้ก็คือทางผู้บริหารบอกว่าเนื่องจากว่าตอนนี้เนี่ยมันมีการใช้เรื่องของ minimum global tax นะคะที่จะเพิ่มขึ้นเป็น 15% ที่เป็น minimum ซึ่งโดยปัจจุบันเนี่ยเราเสียอยู่ประมาณที่ 4% เท่านั้นนะคะทีนี้เราก็มีเรื่องของการคือพยายามปรับให้อยู่ในเขตที่จะไม่ต้องเสียเพิ่มขึ้นอีก 10% เราอาจจะต้องมีการทำ consignment ก็คือเป็นแมทจากลูกค้านะคะเพิ่มขึ้นอันนั้นก็คือเป็นสิ่งที่อยากจะให้โน้ตไว้ค่ะ For the bad situation and the trade war affecting the company profit and sale are not harm.
Yes, so I think one of the big questions everybody is waiting to get an understanding for is how Trump will tariff China and other countries, Southeast Asia, including Thailand. So at the moment, as you know, the US Trump says that he will increase the tariffs on China by another 10% on the tariffs that are already on, and 25% from Canada and Mexico, which I don't think will happen. I think they will come to some agreement. He has not talked about tariffs coming from other Southeast Asian countries, but we believe there will be some tariffs coming through, and we'll have to wait and see. However, we believe that the difference in tariffs imposed on China and maybe Thailand or other Southeast Asian countries, China will be much higher. So in that case, this may be positive for Thailand and Cambodia.
สำหรับตัวที่ถามเรื่องของก็จะพูดนะคะสำหรับเมื่อกี้ที่พูดถึงเรื่องของสถานการณ์เงินบาทแล้วก็สงครามการค้านะคะสำหรับตัวสงครามการค้าต้องบอกตามตรงว่าเนื่องจากว่าพอตอนที่ของอเมริกานะคะที่ทำได้มาเป็นประธานาธิบดีเราก็กังวลเหมือนกันเพราะว่ามันจะมีเรื่องของการปรับภาษีซึ่งทำได้บอกไว้ว่าสำหรับตัวของจีนเนี่ยอาจจะถูกขึ้นประมาณ 10% และสำหรับที่แคนาดาและเม็กซิโกก็อาจจะขึ้นในบางส่วนแต่สำหรับตัวของที่เป็นเอเชียตะวันออกเฉียงใต้อย่างของเราเนี่ยก็ยังไม่ได้มีการพูดถึงเรื่องนี้ซึ่งถ้ามองในแง่ดีก็อาจจะเป็นผลดีกับเราเพราะว่ามันน่าจะไม่มากกว่าที่ประเทศอื่นโดนนะคะ
This one, I think it's the same thing. Yeah. So Profit margins for the company are influenced by obviously our level of loading, interest rates, business level, etc. So again, I said this in many ways, in different ways, but the same thing. The first half of next year is going to be challenging for us, and I don't see a huge increase in our profit margin, which is now currently very low. But the second half of next year, I hope we will see a bigger improvement for all the things that I said earlier. So we would expect the profit margins to start improving in the second half of next year. But of course, a lot will depend on the exchange rates and what kind of tariff policy is imposed on Thailand. Okay, so is that it, or to okay, so with the next question is, what is it?
That's okay.
Oh, okay. Yes. So yes, we have bought the land from Canon. Actually, we just paid the final completion last week, and of course, it has a permit for a factory operation. Yes. Well, you will tell them about us in English.
Shut down Korea.
We're not shutting down Korea. I'm not sure where you get that idea from. What I said was that we are exiting the silicon business, and there probably will be an impairment of assets as a result, but I do not know what that is. A lot will depend on to what extent the equipment that we will not be using can be transferred to the Chinese supplier or be sold in the second-hand market. But there probably will be an impairment as a result of exiting the silicon business next year. So from a cash flow point of view, I think we are okay. I mean, we are still a bit positive despite all these difficulties. And of course, because we raised $125 million in October last year, our net cash position currently is around $275 million. So I think we will be okay despite the difficulties, and we do not plan for any capital raising next year. So we still have time for any other questions. Please feel free to send in your questions in Thai or English. Okay, so let me just continue whilst anyone is thinking of more questions. So clearly the big impact on HANA is the silicon carbide business, as you know. I'm still optimistic that this business will ultimately be beneficial for us. A lot will depend, I think, how the geopolitics will support us. And you may know, because of the recent stoppage by the US government to supply China with certain semiconductors, which the US claim China, they call it dual use. You can use it in commercial, industrial applications, but you can also use it in defense, in weapons. So they say, oh, I'm not going to supply you because of this issue. Okay. So China is very angry, and they are telling all their major companies not to buy American semiconductors. And if that happens, that may support our business going forward. We don't know what, how that will help, but we think that will be positive for us because we're kind of like neutral player. Okay. Okay, so let me continue whilst you think of some other questions. One of the things I think I am quite optimistic about is our new package solutions that we have for power management, because many companies are now asking us to, at the moment we do it all in China because that's where the big growth is for the EV, but they want us to set up this operation in Ayutthaya. So we have negotiations with a number of companies, but we are not going to do this unless they commit to a volume. We don't want to spend more money until they commit. So this is ongoing. But I think the geopolitics will play in our favor. Of course, as I said earlier, we don't know to what extent Thailand will be tariffed. And if the tariff is just put across the country or individually from certain companies, you may have read in the newspaper recently, there are many Chinese companies that assemble solar cell in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Vietnam, and the US government has put tariffs on specific companies which are different in each case, which means they have gone into detail about how that company is doing its business, as opposed to across the board national tariff. So if that is how the US are going to impose tariffs, then that's quite interesting. And we would expect that different companies would be tariffed individually as opposed to nationally across the board situation. Again, everybody is waiting to see, is not sure, and this is something which is very difficult. So we hope that Trump will make his decision, whatever it is, so then we can understand how we can run our business. But at the moment, we just don't know. Everyone is speculating what will happen. So this is the problem going forward. Any more questions? So if no more questions, then maybe we can end the session. And I would like to thank you all for your support. And I can assure you, I am working as hard as I possibly can to get back to where HANA used to be in the past. And I thank you for your patience. And I hope you will still be with me when things get better, maybe second half of next year. Thank you.
Stop working it needs to stop.
โอเคครับผมจะสัญญาเรียบร้อยแล้วนะครับ
โอเคครับ โอเค
ครับผมขอบคุณมากครับผมสวัสดีครับ